Okay, well, let's go ahead and get started. Good evening, everyone. I'm Lucinda Andriani. I'm Deputy County Manager, and I also serve as the Public Works Director, and I also serve in the hat I'm wearing this evening as the Flood Control District Administrator for the county's Flood Control District. And we're excited to be launching this phase of a project that's literally been in a process since 2012, and we've worked through a number of, I'll say, technical changes and other things over the last now almost, I think, about 9 years, and tonight we're here to present the outcome of a lot of in-depth analysis that's been done on the flood risk for the Kachina Village Mountainaire area, and to share the results of that analysis with you. You should have, as if you are within this, I'll say, floodplain mapping effort, you should have received a letter from the County Flood Control District that provided you with some maps relative to your specific parcel, and provided some other information for you about what those potential changes may mean. And tonight we're going to walk through that information. We're not going to delve into individual properties. We have set up a process whereby you can call Public Works, and Public Works manages the Flood Control District as well, and share with Mark. I'll introduce Mark here in a minute. Share with Mark if you have specific questions or concerns, or you want to walk through it with a technical representative. We both have. We're extremely fortunate in this work that we've done, that two of the presenters tonight and those that a lot of the questions will be referred to, if you want to work with someone specifically on the specific impact on your property. One is Bruce Bender, who's with us this evening, who is a national expert in flood mapping changes and how that influences your flood insurance, and is an expert in the National Flood Insurance Program. He works across the country with jurisdictions like ours, cities, counties, flood control districts, that on these types of processes. So he has a great deal of expertise in that arena. And then on the technical side, Linda Potter, who is a professional engineer and again is nationally recognized, works extensively with FEMA and Army Corps and a number of other agencies on flood mapping, as well as floodway requirements and engineering and so forth. She's got a great deal of expertise, has extreme, high level of experience working through these types of processes as well, flood maps. So we've gone through, we've done the technical analysis and provided that information to FEMA. FEMA has gone through a review process, and now they're in the process of publishing these, what are called preliminary flood maps or flood risk maps. And they're going to walk you through kind of the outcome of that process tonight. And then more information about, again, what does that mean to your flood insurance? What are some options that you have available to you potentially to manage the cost of their flood insurance, et cetera. So we've got a great set of experts with us tonight to answer a lot of those general questions, and then also then available for you after the meeting. If you so choose to take advantage of it, you can call in and we will connect you with those experts to answer your specific questions. So, this is a process we've worked through, and we want to be very transparent with this process and provide you the information you need. And basically what will be happening a little later this month is that actually be launching the formal public review process of these maps, and we'll next turn it. Well, first we'll hear from our county supervisor, Matt Ryan, but we'll turn it to FEMA, and she'll provide an overview of this process and get into a little bit more detail relative to that. But important element of this process is the public review process, and that allows the public and those affected by these map changes to provide input, either comments and or potentially appeal the maps. And Bruce will walk through what does an appeal mean and what does a comment mean, but somewhat the limitations relative to those. But this is a science-based process. I think that's what's really important. We have used a very strong technology, much more advanced than where these maps were. The current maps date back, I think, to 1993, if I remember correctly, or even earlier. And clearly the technology, we're all aware how much technology has changed. And certainly in this area, the technology, the software used to analyze flood risk has advanced dramatically, as well as the science around rain events and other pieces of science that are used in these analyses and creating these new maps. So we've used, in fact, part of what slowed this process down is a very important piece of information came forward from U.S. Geological Survey at one point, and we went back to FEMA and said, we want to incorporate this new data into this analysis, and they agreed that that was a good thing to do so that it would be the most current. And so the Flood Control District has really embraced this science-based process. This is not a political process. This is not a process that the Board of Supervisors drives. This is a process that FEMA drives largely. And we, as the delegated authority within the county for FEMA, for the National Flood Insurance Program, we're working in concert with them. And they're doing this across the country. That's important to understand that across the country, these flood maps are being updated so that they more accurately reflect whatever the flood risks are. In some areas, the flood risk may have reduced, it may have gone up. It varies area to area, and we've seen that in our county. We've seen a great, variations even using this more advanced technology. So with that introduction, I'd like to introduce our county supervisor for this area, Supervisor Matt Ryan. He's also serving now as the chair of our board. Matt?
All right. Oh, thank you, Lucinda. And I might repeat a little bit of this, but really important for everybody. There are implications associated with your property, your insurance, and technology has improved. Not only that, but there's a lot going on, and it's really important that FEMA is a critical element associated with national flood insurance program, delegation of these specific maps, and it really applies to a lot of what goes on with insurance. Most important thing that I think we've gathered here together is we have expertise here, and we do have this. We are recording on YouTube. It'll have an opportunity to get it out to more people that are being impacted as questions arise. There will be implications associated with time if you were to appeal. And so you'll have that opportunity to hear about that during this meeting. So that's very important. And then an appeal is a technical thing, and I think they'll explain that as well. Lucinda noted, we're in a process that is a FEMA-driven process, but I want to note experts that we have here tonight. First and foremost, I want to welcome and thank Nancy Steinberg from FEMA Region 9 for being here. We also have Mike Shelton with EWR. As Lucinda noted, Linda Potter, Project Director with Atkins, Bruce Bender Consulting Services. Lucinda introduced herself as the Flood Control District Administrator. We have Christopher Tressler, the county engineer, and John Carr, the Coconino County Community Development Engineering Division. And so we brought on expertise. You'll hear about a lot of what you need to think about, and then we're setting up a process for additional contact that you can reach out and you can have more specific information or get questions answered about your property at a later time, but we'll have that component of the process with us. It should be noted that most of the properties in these areas are not in these remapping areas where the structures are affected. If you received a packet in the mail, then you will have implications one way or another, whether you're in or out, and that can be explained. If you're here and you're wondering what's going on, but you didn't receive a packet, we did want to provide notice to the broader community to be aware that we are going through this process. And if you were interested, you'd have an opportunity to listen to our experts that we have here. A very important note, again, I'll say changes in flood zone can result in changes in the building and flood insurance requirements. Very important pieces. And so after all the mapping's done, the county then falls into the role of the implications of the property. Where is it? How are you zoned? What do you need to do associated with your particular property on this? So we carry that after the mapping's done. And so we have our experts to answer that. One other piece, just quickly, as noted by Lucinda, we in the county, science-driven process. We do an analysis associated with it. We want to use the best science of the current day to draw our maps to ensure that we have accuracy associated with it. Part of the reason that we've had some delays. And with that, I believe I've done my part in terms of welcoming me. Most importantly, let you know that we brought experts here so that you can listen and proceed with the process that we've established. So I'll turn it back over, I believe, to Lucinda.
Great. Thank you so much, Supervisor, and appreciate you being here. And I want everybody to know that he's been very supportive through this process and supported the science-based approach throughout our flood control district, whether we're dealing with the aftermath of, for example, the museum fire and the flood impacts into Flagstaff, or Schultz, or forest restoration and the work that we're doing there. Supervisor Ryan's been very supportive of all of these efforts. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over for our overview of FEMA's risk map program to Nancy Steinberger. Nancy is with FEMA's Region 9, and that is the region that we're within. And so this program, we work directly with Nancy in relationship to this program. So Nancy?
Yeah, thanks so much. I appreciate it. And nice seeing everybody. And I also have Michael Bishop from Region 9, who's the risk analyst. He's also on the meeting. And it's really a great opportunity to get to speak to you guys tonight. You guys have done a great job with the outreach and trying to coordinate the message and make sure everybody understands what the process is and what we're working on and the benefit that it is to the community to have a good understanding of your risk. So the risk map program is something that FEMA has been working on for over a decade. And even prior to that, we had a program called Map Modernization. And the goal of that was to convert the old paper flood insurance rate maps over to a digital product. And so that aspect of it has been completed, and now we're into the risk map program, which is trying to take risk information and actually go one step further with it, increase our communication, increase our risk awareness, and actually try to identify some opportunities to mitigate some of those hazards and risks. And with flooding issues, you have a suite of things that you can do. You can do physical projects on the ground. You can do floodplain management approaches, such as building higher so that you're safer. And and then the insurance program is essential. It's an amazing program, and Bruce will go into the details of it, and it really is worth looking into. If you don't have flood insurance and you want to purchase it, it's highly recommended. And then in certain parts of the floodplain, it is actually required to purchase flood insurance if you have a federally backed loan, but Bruce will explain all that part. Let's go to the next slide. As Lucinda mentioned, it's a national program, and we represent FEMA Region 9, which has, you're seeing that little graphic there. We have 4 states and 3 territories in the Pacific. We have numerous mapping projects ongoing at any given time, and they take several years, again, as Lucinda mentioned, in order to go from start to finish on one of these. So a lot of activity throughout the nation and throughout the region. And then within Arizona, we also have a very active mapping program. And that's a graphic that's showing little dots in the approximate location of where our studies are. Those aren't the actual footprints, but they're just like a placeholder. We currently have more than 30 ongoing mapping projects in the state of Arizona. So it's a big program, very high profile when your community is actually engaged in it, and then you won't see anything happening for a while. And so it's a little bit difficult on the communication side because it kind of comes in spurts. So that's why we're really glad to have this opportunity to connect with the public and support this open house. And I believe that's where I pass it to Linda Potter, who will get into the technical aspects of the study. Thanks.
Great, thank you so much, Nancy. We will try to keep our acronyms to a minimum, but one of the things that we like to do is define some of the terms that you might hear this evening. FEMA is the Federal Emergency Management Agency, and they produce what are called flood insurance rate maps and flood insurance studies. We often call those the FIRM and the FIS. And these map areas of high-risk floodplains or flood areas called the Special Flood Hazard Area, or SFHA, on these maps. And we often use the term floodplain. This can be any land subject to flooding, but for the purpose of this presentation, when we talk about a floodplain, we mean the areas mapped by these FEMA map products. The base flood is one of the areas of higher risk, and it's a 1% annual chance flood event. And the base flood elevation are the flood elevations that will be reached during this 1% annual chance. We'll also be producing, FEMA will actually be issuing a letter of final determination, or LFD, which will state that the maps are becoming effective in 6 months. Next slide. The maps can be a little confusing to look at, and they're designated typically by zones of color or different areas that you can see. In this particular case, the hatched area is the floodway, and this is a portion of the floodplain that's designated to be reserved without increasing the water a certain height. And we're going to define that a little more in just a minute. A high-risk flood zone shown on the map here in the example is in the blue color, and the floodway is also part of this high-risk area. The moderate risk area is shown in kind of the tan or orange color, and this is a moderate risk but a lower chance of occurring. And the low-risk areas were also called Zone X. They're generally outside the 0.2% annual chance flood limits. Next slide. The section shows kind of the definition of what a floodplain is. It's this portion of the floodplain that if there were encroachment into the rest of the floodplain, that it would cause the flood elevation to rise by a designated height. And so this floodway area is a very important area because it allows floodwater to be conveyed with little obstructions. Next slide. We are all aware of this area from living and working. There are some natural flat ponding areas as well as more confined channels where development tends to have encroached on the channel. Next slide. A little bit of a background on the project. Lucinda mentioned we started this a long time ago in 2012 with the goal of revisions to these FEMA special flood hazard areas. The watershed is about 20 square miles that contribute to Pump House Wash and its tributaries. And the watershed is characterized by steep terrain with minimal regional drainage structure, but the flow is typically confined. The existing flood map as it stands today, there are approximately 60 structures and 150 parcels mapped in the floodplain. About 100 of these are in Kachina Village and 50 are in Mountainaire. The updated hydrologic data that we studied more recently included how rainfall and storms tend to be distributed in this area. And this allowed us to remap the FEMA floodplains based on this updated data. And this was resubmitted in 2016, and the preliminary updated flood maps were created in 2020. A summary of the preliminary maps: we have 27 structures that are no longer delineated within this 100-year special flood hazard area. We have some decreases in base flood elevations. We were also able to map shifts that were previously seen compared to the terrain in the flood maps. Next slide. The map on the screen shows the location of the 27 houses that are no longer delineated in the floodplain. Next slide. And you can check your individual property on FEMA's flood map changes viewer. On the screen, you'll see a web address. You can also look it up on an internet search browser to find it. And this will allow you to zoom up closer. You can add your address and look at the flood risks on your specific property. I will note that there is a pin tool in this application that is not working right now. So it'll tell you that there's no flood risk defined, which is not the case. So just wanted to point that out. However, the mapping that's shown there when you zoom up is correct. Next slide. We're here April 21st at our virtual open house. After this, we'll have a public review and appeal comment period, followed by a minimum 6-month compliance period. So the maps won't become effective for about another 9 months, and we'll talk more about the process in a minute here. Next slide. Now I'll turn it over to Bruce Bender, and he's going to talk about our insurance changes.
Great, thanks so much, Linda. As you saw, there aren't many changes occurring in the floodplain of people moving into or out of, but we want to at least let people know what those effects are and what options you have when it comes to effects of map changes on flood insurance. Basically, the ones we'll talk this evening, this isn't a flood insurance webinar or workshop or anything, are those that are newly identified to be at high risk, which we saw there are some going from zone X to zone A. And then we have those that are newly identified to be at a moderate risk that used to be at a high risk. But the majority of Kachina Village and Mountainaire are being unaffected. But this is a good time to talk to your insurance agent about, are you fully covered of what you need to be? So let's look at those two basic insurance rating options that FEMA, or the National Flood Insurance Program, has. The first is called the newly mapped procedure. It's newly identified to be at high risk. So again, zone X to zone A. You can get what are called preferred risk rates, very low cost or lower cost insurance. And they must be purchased within the first 12 months after the map becomes effective, which sounds like sometime later next year. And they basically have minimal claims, kind of like auto insurance. If you have no accidents, no tickets, you're a safe driver, you get low auto rates. It's similar to that. Then you saw there's just over 2 dozen that'll be no longer in the high risk floodplain, but at a moderate or low risk. The risk is not removed. FEMA and Coconino County does not map the no flood risk. It's the level of risk of either high, moderate, or low. And in this case, they're newly identified to be at moderate or low risk. And there's an opportunity for those that have a flood insurance policy to easily convert it over to that preferred risk policy. So a little more detail. Here you have that nice little red house that was in zone X, and now a few of you will find that you're now at a high risk area. The mandatory purchase requirement kicks in, and what that says is if you have a loan, most lenders are going to require you to show you have flood insurance. And so when that occurs, people are worried about, oh my gosh, it's going to cost money. But as just mentioned, there is that newly mapped procedure, which allows you to start at the lower cost preferred risk rates, purchase within 12 months after the map becomes effective, and then slowly going up staircase increases until you reach the standard or full risk rate. Congress has a cap on it right now of 18%, no more than a year. And right now they've been going up about 15% a year. So you don't start right off at that high risk rate. But we say right now, if the maps are showing you at high risk, don't wait. Get a preferred risk policy, because Mother Nature is not going to wait till the map become effective. You got monsoon season coming, so might be a good idea. Premiums start at less than $300 a year. But you also heard there's just over 24 that are no longer going to be in a high risk area. They're now going to be in a low risk area. And here the mandatory purchase requirement no longer applies. It's removed, but the risk is not removed. It's only reduced. In fact, nearly a third of all flood claims in Arizona come from moderate to policyholders who are in moderate to low risk area. So, this doesn't even count those who aren't in, have a flood insurance policy that might have been flooded. So highly recommended to get it. Easy for the agent. They can convert your high risk policy to a low cost preferred risk policy, and you get a refund, the difference in the money. It's automatically done, and you get contents included. So you're strongly recommended to convert your policy and stay protected, both your home and your contents with that. So those are the two types, but most of the people in Kachina Village and Mountainaire are not going to be affected. But it's important that you take a look at what coverage you have. Talk to your insurance agent. Do you have replacement costs? Right now, if you have a policy and it's being driven by the lender requiring it, they don't necessarily require it at replacement costs. They require it at the amount of the loan, which may be less. So if you do have a flood claim, you may not get replacement costs like you would with your homeowners. You get actual cash value, and they don't require contents. And if you're not currently covered for flood insurance, do you qualify for a preferred risk policy? Probably you do. So talk to your agent, find out what coverage is needed there. So in quick summary, if there's an increase in risk, there's money saving options to help reduce the financial impact of map changes. If the risk is decreasing, that's great, but the risk is not removed. So convert that high risk policy to a preferred risk policy and get a refund. And finally, as you saw, almost everyone, there's not going to be a change in flood risk, but make sure you have the coverage you need, both contents and building. And if you're in a moderate to low risk zone, do you qualify for that preferred risk policy? So with this, I'm going to turn it over to John Carr, who's with the Coconino County Community Development Engineering Division. John?
Thank you, Bruce. As Bruce mentioned, I work for community development, and I look for any floodplain permits that come in. And as we discussed earlier, there's a time frame of basically 3 phases: before the letter of final determination, and then after the letter of final determination, and then after the maps become effective. I'm going to have 3 examples that I'm going to go through regarding before the letter of final determination. And then at the end of the presentation, there will be some flowcharts to discuss the other 2 options, which is letter of final determination and after the maps become effective. Next slide. And here's an aerial of Kachina Village, Mountainaire area, and I've highlighted a property that we're going to take a look at. And our task here is to determine the floodplain requirements to build at this site. Next slide. So here's a blow up of that area. And again, this is if you're going to do a new proposed structure or a substantial improvement. A substantial improvement is basically any improvements to an existing structure. There's a lot of detail about the requirements for that, and I can go over that during the Q&A session if people have questions. So the first question is, in which flood zone is it located? Is it in the effective map or the preliminary map? I'm sorry, which zone is it in each one of those? So let's take a look at the effective map. Now in the background, we've put the effective map, and it shows the flood zones. And the green there is zone A, which is a special flood hazard area. There is a 0.2% annual percent chance, which is a 500-year zone, and zone X. And if you look at that legend at the bottom, from top to bottom, it goes from higher risk to lower risk. In this case, we just have zone A and zone X. And this property is in zone X under the preliminary map. So let's take a look at the, it's in the zone X for the effective map. Let's take a look at the preliminary map. Next slide, please. So here is the preliminary map. And as you can see, we have a floodway, zone AE, the 500-year, and zone X. Well, the property is in zone X. And what that means is, next slide, please, that no floodplain permit is required. Let's go to another example. We're still at the same site, and now we've decided to move our structure towards the center area of the property. So we're going to go through the same step again. Look at the effective and preliminary map. Let's start with the effective map. And as you can see here, it's in zone A. So the next step is to go to the preliminary map. And the preliminary map shows the property is in zone A, which is that cyan colored zone. It's also in the 500-year in zone X, but for our purposes, what really only matters is that it's in zone AE. So what that means is a floodplain permit is required. And to build, the structure would have to be elevated such that the lowest floor is at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation. Now, there is a waiver option available at this stage, at the letter of final determination stage, and that allows the owner to acknowledge that the county has advised them that there is a higher risk, but they've decided not to proceed. This will be a waiver letter that the county has a draft version of that. It would have to be recorded. We're going to discourage people from doing that, but that will be an option at this phase. Next slide, please. And now here, take another look, and now we're moving it way down over on the east side of the property. And let's take a look at the effective flood zone. In the effective flood zone, again, we're in zone A. So now we need to take a look at the preliminary map. Now the preliminary map here shows the property is in a floodway, and that is the most risk averse area, or the area that's most prone to flood risks of all the zones. It's also one that we typically discourage any kind of development. And what that'll mean is the requirements are a floodplain permit will be required. Next slide, please. Oh, there we go. Floodplain permit will be required. They'll have to elevate the lowest floor to at least 1 foot above the base flood elevation per this study. And so that would mean that it would have to be at about 6708.7 approximately. And in addition to that, the applicant would have to provide a no-rise analysis prepared by a professional engineer. And that's a high threshold to meet, and it can be expensive. It shows that there will be zero rise as a result of putting the structure in the floodway. And zero rise meaning if there is even 1/100th of a foot rise, it's not acceptable. Again, the waiver option is still available during this phase. Next slide, please. And then we have 3 flowcharts we put together. They look complex, but if you know which situation you're in, they are pretty straightforward. They are online. There's the before letter of final determination, after the letter of final determination, and after the maps become effective. During the Q&A, I'll be happy to answer any questions. And now I'll reintroduce Bruce Bender, who'll talk about options if you disagree with the maps. Bruce?
Great, thanks so much, John. And when a new preliminary map is released, there may be some residents and business owners, developers, and others who may disagree with the changes. So FEMA does provide opportunities to formally submit documents to try and amend the flood maps and the flood study. So we're going to talk about 2 today. One option is through the appeal or comment process, which is a formal process that occurs after the preliminary flood maps release and is submitted. The appeals and comments are submitted during the 90-day appeal and comment period. The other option, branching off to the right, is through what's called a letter of map change, LOMC. Sometimes you'll see the acronym. And this occurs after the flood map and study becomes effective. So it has to become effective for this. And it's for a specific building that may be shown, maybe due to scale limitations, that it's in that high risk zone A, the special flood hazard area, but actually, when you get into the detail of it, may be in a moderate to low risk zone. So going back to the timeline, and you'll see it several times, this timeline during today's presentation, the appeal period is here in the light orange area where the blue triangle is that says submit appeals and comments. And as you can see, it's coming up here at the end of the month. It will start on April 30th and run for 90 days. This is when you file the appeal and comment. But again, at the end of the timeline, when the map becomes effective, this is when you would submit a letter of map change, all the paperwork. Again, you have to wait till the map becomes effective. So let's take a look at each a little closer, just so you have a better understanding. First, let's talk about the appeal and comment. When a new preliminary flood map, like the one we have here, is released, FEMA provides a 90-day appeal and comment period whenever you see revised base flood elevations, new flood hazard zones, or floodway boundaries change. That's what's happened here. This allows them for property owners, developers, and others to submit an appeal, which is an evidence on why they believe the property has been improperly mapped in a zone A or AE. As indicated on the screen that you're looking at, an appeal requires detailed analysis and must be scientifically or technically based. In other words, you just can't say it hasn't flooded here in a long time. I'm going to appeal this map. That does not apply as a technical or scientific appeal. A comment, on the other hand, is something more simple corrections that might be like a road location or a name of the road is wrong, change in the corporate limit, those sort of things. But the appeal is one that has to be scientifically, technically based. So what happens is during that 90 days, you'll submit it to the county review, forward up to FEMA. FEMA will evaluate the data. If they need more data, they'll request it as necessary. When it's resolved, FEMA transmits that appeal resolution letter to the county as well as the people who made the appeal, the appellants. And if resolved and accepted, then they'll make changes to the preliminary flood map as appropriate. Once all the appeals and comments are resolved, the flood map is finalized, and the letter of final determination that you've heard mentioned a couple of times is then sent by FEMA to the county stating, hey, the flood maps will now become effective in 6 months. So that's the appeal and comment part, but there's also the opportunity, again, as mentioned, if the building is situated on natural high ground above the base flood elevation, and it's inadvertently included into that high risk zone A, often due to just a mapping scale limitation. When the new maps become effective, property owners can submit mapping and survey information to request what's called a letter of map amendment, LOMA. You see there on the left on your screen, or a letter of map revision based on FIL, an acronym LOMAR-F. As Linda said at the beginning, we're trying to limit the acronyms, but you may hear those, so we wanted to share that with you. What this does, it's an actual letter that removes the federal mandatory purchase requirement when the LOMA or LOMAR-F becomes effective. But again, we want to emphasize to you, if you get one of these, it doesn't mean the flood risk is removed. It's only been reduced. It's highlighted before that we encourage you to carry flood insurance in those cases, convert the policy to that lower cost preferred risk policy, especially knowing that close to 1/3 of all flood claims are from policyholders in these moderate to low risk areas. So that's a quick overview of the appeal and comments. Just as John mentioned, we're all here at the end to answer any questions you have or put them into the chat. But with that, I'm going to pass it back to Lucinda to close this presentation up. Lucinda?
All righty. Well, thank you. We know that's a lot of information. And, again, I think it's important to know that we have resources that can be made available to you. And really encourage people to reach out. Mark, if you could put up in the chat the phone number and email for people to use. There you go. There's the helpful resources. Thank you. So that people have access to that. I'd appreciate that. And again, what we'll be doing, or it's actually a formal process through FEMA, is beginning that review period was the appeal period, which begins on April 30th and then will run for the 90 days. And again, just want to emphasize that this is a science-based process, and that if you're going to appeal, if you think that there really is some type of mistake was made with the mapping, or there's some kind of technical deficiency, then I'd really recommend that you hire an engineer and that has, of course, floodplain experience, that can really look through everything and advise you accordingly whether to pursue that appeal or not. Because at FEMA, it will go through a formal process. Again, it's a science-based decision. So, and we'll walk through that. So, and know that we go through the same thing. Some of you may be aware, we just did a flood mitigation project in the Mountainaire area. And we're going through a similar process with FEMA, where we had to submit prior to the project, after the project, and they'll decide whether, what the impact, if anything, is on the flood insurance, so, and floodplain. So it's solely their decision. So anyway, I think that kind of wraps it up. We'll go ahead and open it up for questions. And again, if you have a very specific question, again, call the 8300 number there on the screen, or feel free to use the email. Either way, again, we're happy to make some resources available to you to talk through your specific situation. But if you have any kind of general questions about the process, or where to get more information, or other types of things you might be interested in asking relative to this, we're happy to take your questions. So, and I think if you look down, you should have on your screen at the bottom there, and Mark, help me out here, but I know
Yes,
you can go through the Q&A.
bottom center, you bet.
Yeah, down at the bottom, and you can ask a question there. Or you can put it into the chat, and we'll do our best to hand it off to the best person to try to answer that. If we can't answer it, then we will get back to you. So,
Okay. And we have our first question. The question is, where do we find the exact BFE, base flood elevation? Our front door is 60 feet above the surface. The house is on a high stem wall foundation.
60 inches.
Strike that, 60 inches. Thank you.
John, do you want to take a shot at that in terms of where they would find the BFE, or Linda?
Linda, or I'm sorry, I missed that. Linda, are you going to address that?
Sure, absolutely. So there's a couple places that you can find it. The easiest is to go to FEMA's flood map changes viewer. Mark, maybe you can put the on the presentation, there was a slide that had the actual web address on it.
Sure.
Earlier in the presentation. That's the best place to go, because you can zoom in and out and see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't know if you have an existing elevation certificate, but you can compare the new elevation if you have an existing elevation certificate. One thing I do want to note is they have what's called the lowest adjacent grade, otherwise known as a lag. And so that's kind of what FEMA's going to compare to the BFE. It might not necessarily be, your front step that's being looked at. So Those are just some cautions when looking at those elevations. The best person to determine your elevation of those structures, the lag, etc., would be a land surveyor. They're the ones that can come out and give you those exact elevations, but just looking at the maps you can do on the flood map changes viewer.
I'll just add on to that, Linda, that this is John Carr, and if you email FEMA flood map at calcaninoaz.gov, I'll be able to look up to see if there's an existing elevation certificate, and I can look up the base flood elevation if you have trouble online.
Yeah, and this is Nancy. I'll just throw out there the preliminary products are available at the FEMA Map Service Center. So you can download the flood insurance study, and that has the profiles for each stream in there. And that's where the surveyor or the engineer is going to go to get the accurate base flood elevation for that elevation certificate. So if you ask the question to get the an accurate BFE, it would be the profile in the flood insurance study, and that is available even at the preliminary stage.
And it looks like we've got an address typed in there, so maybe John and I can look at that.
That'd be great.
All right.
That'd be great. All right, other questions here, Mark?
Yes, indeed. So we do have one more on this subject, which is, does it matter if the house structure is not totally in the new zone?
This is Bruce. I'll take it from an insurance perspective first, and John, you may want to respond from a building or perspective. But from insurance, the mandatory purchase requirement applies if the structure is in the Zone A. Now, keep in mind, the lender, even if it's not in it, can always still require, but the mandatory purchase requirement says the structure, not the property, but the structure is in the high risk area. Hopefully that.
Could it, Bruce, could it be partially in it or not? Or is it any part of it's in the high risk?
Part. Good. Thank you for clarifying this. Yeah, even if the corner of the building shows to be in the floodplain, the Zone A, then the lender will require it.
Thank you, Bruce. And I think this is important to understand that the National Flood Insurance Program, really the decision, kind of the key decision point is with the mortgage lender. And, that's really the key decision point there. They are really the ones that are driving this requirement. And the only way that you can obtain flood insurance in this country is through the National Flood Insurance Program. I mean, you can obtain it, you can secure that, purchase it through a private insurance company or go directly through the FEMA process. But in effect, everyone secures it through the National Flood Insurance Program. They're just acting as an agent in that sense, right? So important to understand that.
Cool. Excellent. Looks like we have a couple of more questions here. I'll take them in order. The first one is there a list or map that shows the addresses that are increasing in risk and conversely those that are decreasing in risk?
So Linda, could we go back to that map and maybe show it a little bit more closely in terms of those areas?
Sure. Yes, we do have a list of the 27 properties that are going to a lower risk. And then the other ones, you'll have to check the maps. That flood maps changes viewer, you can look in to see for other properties.
And just so you all know, the flood maps change viewer is on our webpage as well. You can link to it from there.
So you want to talk a little bit about this, Linda, and maybe zoom in a little bit, whoever's managing the presentation there, and you can explain a little bit more of this.
Sure. Are we wanting to just explain how to find the individual properties?
Yeah, and just and then just like the green dots that are there, and what is that all?
Sure.
What does the different colors and everything mean? Just walk through that.
Sure, absolutely. So the green stars, the dots, are the locations of the 27 structures that are being transferred from a higher risk to a lower risk zone. The blue outline that you see on the screen that's not filled in, that is the previous or the currently effective flood zones. And then the lighter blue color and the hatched area, that's the new zone AE and floodway. So that's the new higher risk zone. You can see how it matches the terrain a little bit better than the previous maps did. And the flood map changes viewer has kind of color coding. So every piece of property that's seeing a change will have a color coding with a legend to tell you if it's yellow, it means this. If it's purple, it means this. So that should help you look at the maps.
All righty. We had a question come in from Britta in the chat, and that is, we are looking at building on a lot that is going from an A to X zone. Would it make more sense at this point to wait to start building until the new maps are effective to avoid the floodplain permitting, etc.? Or is there any way to start building based on the proposed new mapping?
This is John Carr. I can address that question. And generally the way, and Bruce could probably help me out a little bit here. Generally how FEMA sees things is until it's effective, it's not there. I mean, there's a small chance that there could be a change. So we would encourage people to wait until the effective map goes in before they do that. Otherwise they would have to get the floodplain permit. They could potentially build to the higher standard, but I would like to look at, probably the best thing to do is email me that email address that I showed before, and I can go over it with you in the morning.
Great, thanks, John.
Okay, a couple more questions. I have been told by my insurance company I will need an evaluation costing $500 to over $1,000 before they will give me a quote for flood insurance. And then it says, true? I imagine that's a question. Is that true?
So this is Bruce. I'll take that. The evaluation probably is the elevation certificate that is required to have if you're going to rate, if it's a structure that is built after the first flood map. The flood map is known as a FIRM, flood insurance rate map. So post FIRM, they require an elevation certificate to give you an accurate quote. So unfortunately, to get that quote, you're going to need to have an elevation certificate. Now, I would suggest, and John, put you on the spot here, but I'm sure the county does have some elevation certificates that they may have on file. So before you pay for a surveyor, check your files to make sure you don't have it from previous sale or when you purchased the house, that may come in the documents. Otherwise, maybe reach out to the county first before you go through that expense.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. And we have, the county has a site that has the elevation certificates on file, and I can type in that that web page right now. Did that come through? If you go to that web page, you can search by parcel number, whether it starts by 100, 200, all the way up to 500. And then if it's not there, there's a chance that it could be in another permit. So if you have trouble finding it, don't hesitate to give me a call. Also, one other comment I'd make about elevation certificates. There's been kind of unusual circumstances that have been going on in the county recently, and that is that there have been 2 or 3 surveyors that have retired in the area. And if you combine that with the incredible building that's going on right now, there's a shortage of surveyors. So if it's something you want to do to get an elevation certificate, I would encourage contacting a survey sooner than later, because some of them are going to say they're weeks out.
Okay, looks like a couple more questions. We have one. Your examples show changes resulting in an AE zone. Our property was A and is staying A. Am I allowed to build in the A zone?
John, I think that's yours.
Yes. Are you allowed to build in the AE zone? Yeah, I'd like to look at it particular, but yeah, generally when you build in an AE zone, you would have to elevate your structure so that the lowest floor is 1 foot above the base flood elevation, and that'll be shown in the preliminary map. If you're doing improvements to an existing structure, that brings up the substantial improvement analysis, and that has a process which you need to determine what the value of the existing structure is, not including the land, just the building. And then the amount of improvements that you're putting in, you need to provide a cost estimate, and you divide that cost estimate into the value of the structure, and it has to be less than 50%. If it's not, then if there's a structure in that zone now that's not high enough, you'd have to elevate the whole thing, which can become really impractical for a lot of cases.
John, this is Michael. In reading the question, it's from an A zone and staying in A zone. And can the A zone be built in? So I appreciate that you went into the AZ description or the AE description, but this is a previous A zone and current A zone.
I don't think there's any places where there's an A zone that's going to go to an A zone. It's going to go to, so an A zone is an approximate zone, and I don't think there's any, but I check with Linda. Is that correct, Linda?
Yeah, unless it was on the edge, right on the edge of where we studied, just only at the very downstream tie-in, was there any zone A left? So it will probably be an AE zone. I think we could probably help by looking at the address of the property offline and looking at it and advising you on that.
Probably just to follow up and note, as noted in the beginning of the meeting, there is the opportunity to have a more detailed look by some of these experts or individuals on your specific property after this process, but we would need contact information associated with that.
And it looks like we have one last question. Since Arizona is in a 25-year drought, what is the scientific data that says the flow in Pump House Creek is increasing? The 1992 flood came 12 feet onto this property, which would be 25 feet from the house given 35-foot setbacks.
I can take that question. So yeah, one of the things that we need to do with our hydrology study is that we look at statistics for all of the rainfall events, and we also look at it's called NOAA Atlas 14 precipitation estimates, and we look at precipitation distribution. So we really do our best job possible to look at these type of statistical information and likelihood on risk. So, you know, we call the 1% annual chance a 100-year flood because statistically we would expect it, you know, every 100 years to occur. However, that doesn't mean that it can't occur back to back or that it can't occur, you know, not within that time frame. So again, we're looking more at statistics in risk as well as actual scientific data to come up with precipitation and flow estimates. Hopefully that wasn't too detailed.
Okay. That looks like all of the questions that we have right now.
Okay, excellent. Well, thank you, everyone, for those that participated from the community. We really appreciate your time this evening and appreciate your questions. And again, the information is on the screen here relative to the phone number and email. If you have, again, specific questions, if you start now with this information, start looking at things and you have questions relative to insurance or the maps, please don't hesitate to reach out. I mean, we're here to support you getting, access to the information. If you have challenges getting to the viewer, technical issues or whatever, please, we'll work with you to try to support you with that effort, and provide as much of that information that's available to you. This is all public information, and it's all, we're trying to set up systems to make it as easily as accessible to you as possible. So with that, I really want to thank everyone that the presenters tonight, and thank the commitment to this process. Again, just a reminder that this is being done so that property owners and obviously mortgage lenders understand what the flood risk is using the best technology available. And none of us want to believe we're in a flood area, and we look at and we say, well, it's never flooded here. Will it really ever happen to me? But just really want to encourage people, if, we know that these areas, this area, because of our monsoon dynamic, irrespective of droughts, we can still have very significant flood events. We've had a 300-year event here in Flagstaff. Within the last 10 years, we've had 3 100-year events in this greater Flagstaff area. We've had a 1,000-year event. We had 2,000-year events, several in 18. We've had several 500-year events. It happens. So if you are in this area, I certainly, even if your risk is diminished, I would still really encourage you to look at retaining flood insurance. Certainly go through the process Bruce identified to try to see if you can get a preferred premium program that you can participate in that type of effort and lower your costs. But it's really the only way. If you suffer damage through flooding, it's the only way to recover any level of the cost or damage that, impact that you may have sustained financially. There is no other mechanism. So anyway, make sure you're keeping that in mind as you progress forward with this process. And again, really thank everyone for all the hard work on this effort. So
yeah, I'll follow up. And as well. I want to thank the presenters. We will have this on recorded and accessible. This is the first of 3 that we're going to go through. But if you have questions, please reach out, and we'll have staff work together with you to help see if we can answer your questions. As noted by Lucinda, it really is about your property. We have seen these events. If you add fire onto it, that exacerbates the potential for flooding. It really makes a big difference. We've seen it occur. There are impacts. And you can go for a half a century or a quarter of a century, and then suddenly the event is there. So very important to take a look at. I want to thank everybody as well for attending.
all right, good night, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.